Hello everybody, welcome to Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about the new album from Floating Points, Crush. Floating Points is the alias for UK artist Sam Shepard, an artist who I kinda wish I'd looked into earlier. I mean, he's not exactly the most prolific artist in the world. This is his second mainline album under the name, unless you also count Reflections Mojave Desert, a thing he came out with in 2017 that I skipped over for the time being. Heard it was an EP, I'm not sure, but whatever. May have to come back to that later. But it's probably more important that I talk about this guy's debut album in 2015, Elaenia. This album basically got universal acclaim across the board. And I didn't even know it existed at the time. I didn't even know he existed at all until 2 years later when the Mojave Desert EP thing came out. And I didn't actually get to hear that debut until now, and well, I think I can feed into that hype as well. Elaenia was pretty freaking good. I've seen comparisons to Fortet, and yeah, that would probably be the closest match, but even then, its combination of minimal micro house music with a wide, sweeping jazz ensemble isn't quite like the kind of stuff even Fortet's done before. Has enough of its own identity, and still, unsurprisingly, plays pretty heavily into my own tastes. If I do have any issues with it, it's that the album just abruptly cuts off at the end of its final track, just as it sounded like it was about to climax into something really impressive. Like, just hard cuts and boom, it's over. That's, not sure I'm a fan of that move, but all the same, it was a really refreshing listen, and as someone who likes some minimal house and some jazz instrumentation, this album did in fact hit the spot, just like it seemed to for most people. It was fun. And, like many artists who have attempted to combine electronic with jazz in their own way, Floating Points is now signed to Ninja Tune. And he's got a second album called Crush that I heard was going to be playing more into the electronic and house side of things than the jazz stuff, if not necessarily completely abandoning it. But needless to say, I was intrigued. So what did we get with Crush? Well, this was pretty solid too. Better than Elaenia? Probably not. I mean, I've only listened to that album once. But right from the outset, that album did feel more cohesive and better paced than this one. But I did still quite enjoy this album. This thing reminds me of some surprise favorites from last year, The Drum's Portrait with Firewood and Ski Mask Compro. Seems to be working a lot of elements that made those projects work as well as they did. Like the acoustic and modern classical elements of the former, as well as its UK garage influence. But also like the latter, this album is much more concerned with the electronic side of things. The string sections are basically just window dressing. And this album has plenty of fun doing cool and creative stuff with its blend of house music and UK garage and ambient and IDM and the like, with a variety of drum textures that are never too intrusive but bang all the same, just like those on Compro. And there's some newer Fortet-ish stuff here too. Many synth textures reminded me of those on New Energy a bit, which is now a positive attribute. I like that album now. Not really any jazz here, but there's plenty of stuff to recommend here. So if you like Elaenia, you'll probably like Crush as well, if likely not as much. So may as well talk individual tracks. When this album started, I was honestly so impressed that I thought this thing was going to be even better than his debut. The glitched up string sections on the opener, Falaise, pulled me in immediately and felt really emotionally charged. And then we moved into Last Bloom, which started out all subtle and stripped back with all its reverbed minimal synth notes and building up a fun and danceable beat underneath, and really kept me engaged. And by the time we hit Anasickmodular, which switched the drums over into some bouncier burial-esque rhythms, but still keeping all the synth melodies in the same space and like they were paying off Last Bloom's build-up, I was officially all in on this album, ready to stamp it with a solid 8 or higher. But after those first three, the album kind of meanders, goes off on some detours, and the pacing kind of turns into an unfocused mixed bag. Well, there's no outright bad tracks on here. Many tracks at least felt interesting, made for better variety, but not only was the flow from track to track not as solid, many tracks didn't really grab me as much, just kind of felt like it went all over the place from this point on. I did appreciate most of the lower key and slower moments, if some of them felt a bit on the inconsequential side. Requiem for CS70 in strings delivered on what the title promised, a little beatless synth doodle that gave me some Niels Fromm all melody vibes. Caracol is a neat little experimental ambient interlude, and near the end you got tracks like Birth, kinda repetitive interlude that doesn't add much and is like a less memorable equivalent to VLR from Ski Mask Compro. But right after, you get Sea Watch, which was easily my favorite of the beatless tracks. Just this very stripped-back soundtrack-ish piece that kinda has a modern classical piano feel to it, but with his bubbly synths replacing the actual piano. Absolutely beautiful moments on this thing. The album really should have just ended here, if you ask me. Unfortunately, it kind of just keeps going after that. The last two tracks form a two-part suite called Apoptos. A pair of pretty alright IDM numbers, which are fine out of context, but they're pretty emotionally detached, forgettable, and are kind of a redundant addition. There's nothing here you couldn't already get and better out of a previous track on this thing. Not to mention, having to end the album takes me out on an ambivalent note that ends up making the whole album feel less special. Probably could have cut these last two altogether. But alright, the rest of the beat-focused tracks I haven't already mentioned are all great. LesAlpx, or however you say that, is unquestionably the best one in the bunch. Super propulsive beats that are relatively light, but have an undeniable groove to them, and all its melodic textures, while quite simple, continually keep me on the edge of my seat. Even has a fake ending at one point, because why not? That's a definite banger. And so is Bias, though it doesn't seem like that at first. It just has all of these slightly unnerving wobbly melodies all by themselves. Sounds at first like it's going to be some kind of weird ambient interlude, but it just keeps building up and building up as it goes on, and it becomes really satisfying and fun and hard-hitting by the end. And it flows really well into the nervous energy of Environments. All its off-balance and dizzying melodies going up against this manic and fast-paced jumbled breakbeats, still forming a solid groove. It reminds me a little of 50 Euro to Break Boost. And, yeah, that's every track on here. So, yeah, this album doesn't quite reach greatness. It is kind of an underwhelming ending, feels a bit scattershot on the whole. Not to mention, while again Floating Points does have a musical identity, Crush does resemble a lot of other projects I've heard before, so it doesn't have much in the way of novelty either. But I did definitely derive a fair bit of enjoyment from this album. I've heard this was put together in 5 weeks, and it certainly never sounds rushed or feels below professional grade, and pretty much all of these tracks delivered at least something for me to enjoy. So, I guess at the end of the day, I'm in line with pretty much all the other critics I've seen talking about this guy. I'm overall feeling a 7.5 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me a review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time. Alright, I made it before the battery ran out.